There are various theories as to why Elizabeth I of England never married. Perhaps she was put off by the troubles of her predecessor and half-sister, Mary Tudor, who had married the Catholic Philip II of Spain, or the misfortunes of her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots. In the end, it matters little why, because the important thing to know is that on Elizabeth's death in 1603, James VI succeeded her throne to become King of Scotland, England, Ireland, and France. Wales at this time had been subsumed by England. Ireland was a kingdom without a king, and a colony of the English. And the French part was a claim left over from the 100 Years' War that wasn't dropped until the 19th century. Although James wanted to be styled King of Great Britain, the English Parliament would not consent to this title. James VI and First was unlike any monarch England had ever had. He saw himself as an intellectual whose harsh but comprehensive education under Scottish humanist George Buchanan had given him theories of government and kingship at odds with the English tradition. He believed that he had been given the divine right to rule, which he had outlined in his true law of the free monarchies. This put him at odds with the strong parliamentary system of England, which he begrudgingly had to compromise with, and temper his grand visions for a unified Great Britain, bound by the sea, with common institutions, particularly in law and religion. However, the Scottish Parliament, the Kirk, and especially the English Parliament, were keen to preserve their distinctiveness and did not share his grand ambitions. Tutored from infancy to be the model Protestant monarch, James was able to emerge from Buchanan's beatings to be an independent thinker who wrote several polemics on a wide variety of subjects. One of the most important of these for the understanding of his conception of kingship is the True Law of Free Monarchies, published in 1598, which is subtitled, crucially, as The Reciprocal and Mutual Duty Betwixt a Free King and His Natural Subjects. If this text represented James' grand theory of divine right, Basilicon Doron, which he published the following year as an open letter to his son and heir presumptive Henry, was a guide for the ideal ruler in practice. James had a clear idea of what he wanted to achieve as a king of both Scotland and England. He also had a lot of time to plan because of Elizabeth's long and childless reign. Unfortunately, his ideas for Great Britain, with common institutions of law, parliament and church, were met with staunch opposition of the English Parliament, who limited his desire to create a fully integrated new country. English common law is and was based on custom and precedent, and was a factor in the Parliament's opposition to James's grand and sweeping plans. As a king who considered himself divinely ordained as God's representative on earth, he was not afraid to weigh in on history-making issues, such as the constitutional feature of the British Isles. Equally, he took an interest in the finer detail of policy and social phenomena, such as the rise of the smoking habit, with the advent of products from the New World, against which he wrote a pamphlet called Counterblast to Tobacco in 1604. While in Scotland, James wrote the influential Demonology, in which he laid out his theory of witchcraft, where select women, predominantly, but also certain men, were thought to be agents of the devil, disrupting nature through sorcery to evil ends. From 1500 to 1700, around 5,000 people were tried as witches in Scotland, and James VI personally oversaw several trials in the 1590s. The North Berwick trials were a reaction to his experience of violent storms on his journey to Elsinore to marry Anne of Denmark. When James VI became King of England, however, he demonstrated political tact in dealing with the demands of the Puritans at Hampton Court in 1604. He was presented with a list of several complaints about specific practices in the Church of England, and the Puritans expected to find a sympathetic ear in the Presbyterian Scot. James, however, wanted to strengthen the institution of the Church of England as an important power base, flatly summarising his position in the phrase, "No bishop, no king." To appease both sides, he commissioned a new translation of the scripture by Anglican and Puritan scholars, known as the King James Bible, which remains highly influential to this day. On the 5th of November 1605, Guy Fawkes and his Catholic collaborators planned to blow up the Houses of Parliament in what has come to be known as the Gunpowder Plot. Obviously, they were caught before they could light the fuse, and Fawkes was tortured into betraying his accomplices, before being hanged, drawn and quartered. This was an early example of a terrorist attack being averted, and despite the bonfire night effigy custom, there was relative tolerance of Catholics during James's reign. James was not a warlike king. One of his first acts as English monarch was to end the war with Spain in 1604 that had dragged on under Elizabeth. During the 17th century, the Dutch were involved in an intra-Protestant religious debate triggered by the thinking of Jacobus Arminius, where James sided with the Orthodox Calvinists' refutation of these innovations at the international summit known as the Synod of Dort, that was held from 1618 to 19. James was literally wedded to Calvinism because he had married his daughter Elizabeth to Frederick V of the Palatinate, who became embroiled in the 30 Years' War conflict when he was invited to rule Bohemia. There was, however, no official English intervention on the continent, and the enthusiastic Scots who went to fight for Protestant rulers did so without royal sanction. The reign of James coincided with the career of the world's most revered playwright, William Shakespeare, whose players became the king's men and were patronised by the royal court. Plays like Measure for Measure reflected contemporary issues such as law and justice and the rise of moralising Puritanism. King Lear responded to James's vision of Great Britain as an integrated political unit by reaching into the ancient past for a mythical precedent and warning against the dangers of unnecessary division. Macbeth pandered to his Scottish roots, his obsession with witchcraft, and probed questions of natural order and tyranny.